Welcome to Sacred Stories Podcast, a place to explore and discuss new and exciting books of consciousness. I'm your host, Reverend Patricia Caginello, and speaking with authors that have shared their wisdom and stories through their books is one of my favorite things to do. Today we are speaking with Rev. Stephanie Redfeather, author of her new book, The Evolutionary Empath, a practical guide for heart-centered consciousness. As an ordained shamanic minister, Stephanie's passion is to help fellow empaths embrace their soul's calling to evolve humanity to the next stage of consciousness. Stephanie is the founder of Blue Star Temple, where she has led experiential workshops, initiatory processes, and private facilitation since 2007. You can download your free Evolutionary Empath Activation Manual at Stephanie's website, bluestartemple.org. And so welcome, Stephanie Redfeather, to Sacred Stories.
Thanks so much, Patricia.
I'm really happy to have you here. You know, we've worked together for a brief period of time now, and I am just really impressed. I have to say, and I just want to, share it with the world. I'm very impressed with the depth of the presence that you hold, and the consciousness that you bring to your work and to others.
Thank you. I'm just taking that in. I appreciate that. And I can tell you, as most people have walked down the road of expanding consciousness, it is often hard won.
It's not all, rainbows and unicorns as it may appear. And I believe that it's, even a little more interesting, if we want to use that word, for people of consciousness that are also empaths. Would you agree?
Yes. There's much to navigate.
So what I find fascinating about the work that you do is not only do you work, are an empath and do work with empaths, you've written a book called The Evolutionary Empath. So tell us first what an empath is for those who may not be familiar, and then what is an evolutionary empath?
Yes. So the shorthand version of what an empath is a highly sensitive person. That's just kind of the everyday vernacular. But one of the things that my spirit guides charged me with in writing the book was to create a definition of what it means to be an empath. And so in my book, I talk about the 5 qualities of an empath. I talk about, my definition of an empath is an entire paragraph long because it just involved so many components that come together. But the word evolutionary, that wasn't present for me when I started the book, but as I kept writing, I kept getting more downloads and higher perspective, and it just became so clear that, to me, every empath is an evolutionary empath because we are here to help evolve humanity to the next level of consciousness. We're not a random occurrence. I've kind of coined the phrase the empathic Big Bang. So all of us who are here on the planet right now, who've been born in the last century or so, we are collectively the empathic Big Bang, here to help contribute to this evolution of consciousness.
I absolutely love that, the empathic Big Bang. And so I think I might start using that, but I'll definitely credit you with it, but I may use it. So the evolutionary empath is the difference with from a highly sensitive being, that your description of an empath is the evolutionary empath, the people that are here today?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, for me, like I said, every empath is an evolutionary empath. At least as I worked with this material and I worked with my guides and I downloaded this information from kind of the greater field, if you will. Every single one of us who's here on the planet with this kind of different energetic physiology, we're all here to help contribute to the raising of vibration of the human collective to help humanity shift into a more heart-centered consciousness. And so every one of us are evolutionary, but that doesn't mean we all have to go, does that mean I have to like be a public figure? Does that mean I have to, it's like, it doesn't mean that you have to take on this massive mantle of responsibility. It just means no matter how you live your life, big, small, mundane, outrageous, you are here contributing to that collective raising in vibration and consciousness.
And so the book that you wrote that is published by Inner Traditions is called The Evolutionary Empath, A Practical Guide for Heart-Centered Consciousness. So is this a roadmap? Tell us what your book is about.
Yeah. Well, it started to organize itself into two parts. And so when I talk about what the book is and what it contains, I have to explain it in two parts. One of the gifts I think that I bring is context. I'm very good at looking at the bigger picture and figuring out how pieces fit in. And so the first half of the book is that bigger picture context, where I talk about the evolution of the empath and how even 100 years ago, we collectively as humanity were not at a place in consciousness where very many empaths could thrive and survive. I talk about where we are in the grand cycle of time. I refer to the Great Year, which is a 24,000-year cycle of ascension and descension, and that we are in an ascending phase, which is why empaths are here. It's our time. We're here on purpose. I talk about the definition of an empath and break it down and give examples from interviews of other people that I've talked to and just set the stage, give all of that context so that people can locate themselves inside of this bigger picture, and hopefully that creates inspiration and gives them an understanding of why they're here and why they're different. The second half of the book is more of the rubber meets the road, practical tools and mindsets and practices. So how to establish boundaries, what even is a boundary, energetic hygiene, how to manage your energetic field, keep it clear, because one of our gifts as empaths is that it's easy for us to merge and blend with other people. Then consequently, it's difficult for us to figure out where we end and the next person begins. And so all of this work around managing our energy field and establishing boundaries is huge. And then I also talk about self-care. I talk about the masculine and feminine archetypes and how those play into this understanding. And the book includes 8 guided meditations that I've created that are very helpful and allow a person to really dive in and have a visceral, body felt sense with some of these concepts I'm talking about.
Locate ourselves. What a really phenomenal just kind of phrase, like when you said that, I feel like there's such a depth of meaning, of energy to that, that where we kind of are finding our place within this larger, not only world, but cosmos, and bringing meaning to the experiences that we're having. It's really actually a beautiful phrase, Stephanie.
Thank you. And it, doing this, writing this work and downloading it was just as meaningful to me because it really helped me just know, like get it in my bones. I'm here on purpose. When those days come up where you just wonder, why am I here? And you want to go hide in the corner, and am I making a difference? And oh my God, is the world spinning backwards? I can look at this bigger perspective, and it helps calm me, it helps center me, it helps remind me why I'm here.
So tell us your sacred story that led to the writing of the Evolutionary Empath.
Yes. Well, it involves my entire life, of course, because I've been an empath since I came onto the planet, but for the first 30 plus years, I didn't know it. So I spent all of that time feeling everybody else's emotions and thinking they were mine and taking on everybody else's stuff and being constantly overwhelmed and overstimulated and highly emotional. And, I'm sure there's a lot of people hearing this that can relate. An interesting component of my journey relates to the masculine and feminine piece, which is, of course, why it is included in the book. But I was a very creative, intuitive child. My mom said when I was young, I can just tell when somebody wasn't feeling good or they needed a boost. And she said I would just crawl up into their lap. And, I don't know if I could even speak at that time, but it was just an awareness, a recognition that the person needed support, and that I was intuitively feeling that and wanted to support them. And that has, continued on into adult life, minus the getting up in people's lap part. But but I went to a creative and performing arts school. I danced, I sang, I was on stage, I was in a dance company with the city. And then fast forward a few years and I get a math degree and go into the Air Force. So that's a whole story in of itself that we probably don't have time for. But I spent my late teens and, certainly my 20s and my early 30s heavily in my masculine energy, because as a young teen, my feminine started feeling unsafe in the world, unappreciated. And so the way I described it is that my masculine came in and said, I'll save you, and to the best of his ability, and put her away and put her in a box for safekeeping. And so a huge part of my spiritual awakening, when that finally occurred for me, was bringing the feminine back, reclaiming her, opening her up the box and inviting her back in addition to figuring out I was an empath and how to just manage all of these sensitivities and what to do with my gifts, and leaving the Air Force thinking that I was going in this direction, and it did a complete 180. So when I call my time in that beginning of the spiritual awakening, I call that my time in the spiritual crucible, because that was about a 5-year period where I feel like I lived about 100 years just getting cooked down, whatever wasn't authentic, whatever didn't serve me. I was just getting mushed, through strainer upon strainer upon strainer, until there's this sort of alchemically transformed me at the end of it. And so when I stepped out of the spiritual crucible and kind of stumbled and, wiped my brow and looked around and went, okay, the world's still here and everything's still going and I'm alive. Whew, okay, now what? And it just became clear that through all of that, I had gained perspective and wisdom and understanding. And I felt like I had some gold nuggets, some useful tools and perspectives that could help other people so that their time in the crucible would not be so painful and agonizing and long and drawn out and supportless, because I really felt like I had very few resources to help me figure out what was happening. So the Evolutionary Empath was just born out of all of that. Like, I wish I had this guide when I was going through my spiritual awakening. I wanted to be able to explain things to people and help them, support them, let them know that they're not alone, and give them tools and understanding, and especially these subtle energetic concepts, so that they could begin to thrive in their lives.
I think that is so important, and I'm grateful that you've written this book, because it's interesting, the more consciousness that people are opening to, or if we kind of travel or live in these consciousness circles, we just think, well, everybody understands or everybody gets it, and in reality, it's just this tiny, minute part of the population, I think, so far, that really even knows what an empath is, and and has any concept of the self-care or the information that you have in your book. I was at a workshop about 2 weeks ago, and this came up, and one of the women was, said, well, so and so just told me I'm an empath. I'm gonna have to figure out what an empath is. And I was like, wow, wow, yes, this information is vital to get out there.
Mm-hmm. Yes, yes. And I'm so glad that the world is receptive to it. I mean, it's time. Like I said, it's just time. We're here on purpose for a reason, and it is time that we get the support and the acknowledgement that we need.
Right. Was it challenging or exciting, to actually pull the book together to share all this information? What was that like?
Mm-hmm. It was very exciting. It didn't feel like a drudgery. I never was like, oh God, what am I going to write? Every author has their own process. And while I had a general idea of what I wanted to write, I've led empath workshops for years. And so I took a lot of that material to seed the book. And then that information started to rearrange itself, and it became clear what wanted to come through. But yet there were some chapters that I wrote, like there's a chapter in here called Stop Trying to Get Back into the Garden, that I didn't know I was going to write that. I sat down to write about self-care, and this whole other piece just came through me. So, it was a beautiful experience, and every time I sat down to write, what was important to me and the intention that I held was, I want this information to be activational. I want this book, I want these words to be a portal. I want it to be a living field of intelligence that the readers can interact with and receive downloads and transmissions from. So every time I sat down to write, I said that prayer, I set the field, I set my intention so that I could be a channel for this information. And really the only challenging part, or maybe, I don't know if challenging, I felt a lot of pressure, is what I spoke to earlier when my spirit guides gave me the only directive, which was to create the definition. Because that's not anything I've seen in any material, any place where anybody has attempted to get granular on what it means to be an empath.
It's just such a phenomenal book. And I think one of the things that I appreciate most about it is your information on self-care, right?
Mm-hmm.
Because we can know all these other things, but unless we're actually creating that foundational support for ourselves, through self-care, it's almost like we're just trying to stay a step ahead of everything, in a sense. Share a self-care tip for empaths with our audience, please.
Yes, absolutely. I have to laugh because I was saying essentially the same thing in the book, like, okay, the number one self-care tip for empaths is managing your energy and setting boundaries. And then, kind of tongue-in-cheek said, yes, I realize that's two things. So I'm just going to build on that, because obviously I have to separate out managing your energy field, understanding your energetic container, and then drawing boundaries. I have to talk about them as two separate entities, because a book is linear and you can't talk about everything at once. But in my mind, in my knowingness, in my experience of it, learning where you end and the next person begins is not just a self-care tip. It is advice for living a healthy, fulfilling life. It is crucial for empaths to become aware of themselves as an energetic being, so that one, they can check in and go, okay, what's even in my energy field? Do I even have boundaries? A lot of empaths don't, or it's just Swiss cheese. It's a revolving door. Everybody's coming in and out and they don't even know it. So figuring out where your edges are, and then laying claim to your sovereign space, sitting inside your own throne, ruling your own kingdom, choosing what goes in and what goes out, clearing your energy field, learning to draw boundaries, choosing what what you want to engage in and what you don't, and learning how to say no and asking for what you need. So that's probably 100 self-care tips in one tip. But it really is that important and that big of a deal.
But how do you do that? How do you know, or how do you distinguish where your energy ends and another one begins? Is there a simple process, or just something people can keep in mind to do?
Yeah. There is a guided meditation that I offer that, and I do it at my workshops as well, where you just visualize, and if you're not a visual person, you can just sense it or feel what your energy container is. So if you don't know, you can just imagine a bubble or a sphere around you. And it's not a one-time thing. It is a relationship that you are developing. And so the first step is just getting used to the idea of your energetic container. And in the meditation, I guide people through expanding their container, seeing what that feels like, and then contracting it back to a comfortable distance, and then going out a little further and coming back, and then going out even further and coming back, just so they can start to get an experience of, what is my field? What does it feel like when my edges are up close to me? What does it feel like when my edges are maybe the size of a room or the size of a city block? And in establishing that and getting comfortable with what your edges are, at the same time, it is simultaneously a tool to help manage yourself when you are in public or just with other people, because it tends, for most people, that to feel more safe and secure and contained, they're going to bring their energy field in a little bit. And so it gives them an opportunity to just start experiencing their edges. And it is a lifelong practice. It is something that it's a muscle that has to be built. It's an awareness that has to be developed.
Stephanie, I'm calling you Stephanie Empath. Stephanie Empath Redfeather. I think that works. Thank you. And what would you like to leave our listeners with today?
Yeah. You're not crazy. It's the title of the first chapter of the book. You are not crazy. And if you want to understand the greater context of why you're here as an empath, to understand your cosmic mission, and to have the tools and practices to be able to draw those boundaries and perform your energetic hygiene, then I invite you to pick up a copy of the Evolutionary Empath. It is, I tried my best to hold nothing back. And when I wrote this book, it was about 100,000 words almost. And I was afraid it might be too long for a publisher, but fortunately they grabbed it. So this is chock full of information to help you thrive as an empath.
And what's your website? How can people get in touch with you?
Yes, it is bluestartemple.org. And on there I have video home study program, workbooks, meditations, and ideas for many, many more that will be coming in 2020 as well. I do have live workshops. I've got one in Kansas City, December 6th through 8th. So they can go there and just take a look at everything that I've got available.
Wonderful. Thank you, Stephanie Redfeather, author of the new book, The Evolutionary Empath, for joining us today.
Thank you so much.
And thank you to our audience for listening. You've been listening to the Sacred Stories podcast. I am Reverend Patricia Caginello. And until next time, as always, I encourage you to write your sacred story well.